Hi, friends. I guess here we go. I'm going to present on my research. I'm trying really hard not to laugh right now, but I actually have been frantically researching the past couple of weeks. Um, Found little time before that to do a whole lot. Um, my topic is on observation and the negotiation between the internal and the external. During a lot of my critiques this summer, Cezanne and Diebenkorn kept coming up. So I thought I would use them to explore this idea of responding to perception and observation, but not to come to some mimetic conclusion. For those of you who are also teachers, I'm sure you remember in your education courses reading about Victor Lowenfeld and the haptic and the visual learner, or visual and haptic artist. This is a concept that Diebenkorn was actually very excited about. If you look at the figure on the left, excuse me, this would be an example of a visual learner, a student who is trying to represent the world accurately as it is observed. Proportions are, roughly accurate. They're both depicting someone picking a piece of fruit that's very high, but the one on the right touches on is the haptic artist and touches on the expression of the internal and the experience or the emotional content to what is being represented. With that hand sort of enlarged and just barely touching the fruit, you can get a sense of anxiety, whereas the other one is someone reaching up and grabbing the fruit. It's very much more trying to represent something realistically. Both are rooted in representation, but one is about the representation of the external, observable, and the other one is more about representing the internal of struggle of the artist or state of the artist. This is something that's been coming up a lot in my reading about Cezanne. I have not read much about Diebenkorn as of yet, but in the readings about Cezanne, there are a lot of comparisons made between the Impressionists and the Symbolists, and those ideas of the visual and the haptic artists seem to apply to these two groups. As we all know, the Impressionists were interested in a specific light about a specific time of day. They were interested in the impression. Impression is also a very interesting word, because it is, looking at this dichotomy, they really do overlap. They're both visual, schools of visual image making, but the Impressionists were interested in representing the external, and the kind of light that happens in a specific time of day, or um, about the impression. And when they talk about impression, though, I find it interesting that they talk about impression being an all over bodily experience of a moment, not necessarily, they don't limit it to visual. And the symbolists, on the other hand, were interested in representing the internal world of the artist, but they're still doing it through representational visual means. So we still have landscapes and figures showing up, um, but they're employed in their work in representation, not just of them, but of their internal emotional state. And I think the, there gets to be a lot of gray area in that. Maybe that is happening. Both kinds of things are happening in both places, but just to greater extremes. So, in Richard Schiff's on Cezanne and the death of Impressionism, he sets up this diagram, talking about nature and temperament. So, like the Impressionists would be looking to represent nature, and the symbolists would be looking to represent the artist. So they're both negotiating the impression and the emotion in their work to represent an ideal or an effect. The ideal of um, being maybe more towards the symbolist, and the effect more towards the impressionist. But from what I could glean, this sort of indicates that sort of overlap that I just get from the reading. My research, and it has been, it, the serendipitous nature of how things work through my critiques with David Dempey-Wolf and Sharon and Dr. Richards. Some things that have come up have been how we see. So you see in this slide the blue arrows. See if I can get rid of them. We're pointing at these two shapes, which are relatively identical shapes and colors, but the way we perceive them differently because of the surrounding colors, because of the situation, and because of our own experience, especially as visual artists. And so this Bo Lotto, I saw a YouTube video, a TED Talk that he gave on perception and vision. And so that's starting to lead me down some other paths. And the idea that um, there is no meaning to data, like our visual data. There is no meaning. It's only the meaning we um, apply to it. So, like inherently, we don't look at things. Things could literally have no meaning. In the case of these two, where when compared without all the other information, they are identical, but in their context, we can view them as different. I find that really interesting, and I think it applies to Cezanne and Diebenkorn's work in that they are both responding to landscape, and we're getting very different interpretations, both as it's being filtered through the artist and through the culture, the time, and the approach to work. So these are some early Cezanne works, and I will admit I was not a big fan of Cezanne before this summer, and I'm not sure whether or not I'm a big fan of Cezanne now. I have been thinking about him quite a bit. Um, his early works are much more uh, akin to maybe the symbolists. He's painting violent scenes of rape and murder. The figures are much more symbolic and sort of um, motive. The work is not what we typically think, or what I typically thought of. And then we get to his work that is more representational and typically sort of included with the Impressionists and sometimes the Symbolists. And I'm starting to get a clearer picture that he kind of stands out in modern art because he was painting the experience of being in the landscape, shifting of vision, and the multiplicity of looking, and like the sensation of light and color and value, and how that filtered through him. This is some early work of Diebenkorn, early influences from Hopper, and an earlier painting from Albuquerque, where things I've read talk about the fact that wherever Diebenkorn was, that was the kind of light that you experienced in the painting. So the light, although he didn't often work from direct observation, he said it all just sort of cycled through the works, as he put it. So again, with the external versus internal, we would I would probably assume that Cezanne is more of an external um, artist working with an external stimuli, and maybe Diebenkorn a little more strongly internal, although Diebenkorn has been quoted as talking about he's working from a tradition and he's carrying on a certain tradition as it's coming and filtering through him. So here we have the seawall, a famous painting by Diebenkorn, um, and it was not painted on location. It was um, painted after his visit to the coast, and when he returned home, he painted this in studio, but it's still evocative of the landscape. Here are some of my uh, sources I've been visiting, and I would like this to grow. Of course, I have a lot of work to do in terms of research. I think my research will delve much deeper into observation and perception, and also how that relates to the work of Cezanne and Diebenkorn, and maybe explore how that really also plays out in my work and how my work fits into that conversation. Because that's really, I guess, what we're all getting to, right? So if I haven't bored you and you haven't fallen asleep by now, I'll take this opportunity to say I hope you're all well. Some of you I get to talk to more than others, so those of you out there in the dark, hopefully we'll get to be in touch soon, and be well.